You're listening to Paranormal Optimist. My name is Stephanie, and in this podcast, we dissect paranormal topics from the perspective of skeptics, believers, and everyone in between. At the end, it's up to you to decide. Are you a paranormal optimist? Hello and welcome. Today is Tuesday, so not only is it another episode of Paranormal Optimist, but it's also another episode tackling the Mothman of Point Pleasant. I know some of you may be getting sick of this fascinating story, or maybe you don't think it's as fascinating as I do, and that is totally fine. I think with this episode, we can finally reach at least a temporary stopping point when it comes to Mothman. Just the really amazing thing about this case is that you can always find another element to focus on. I'm going to wrap it up with this episode today, at least for now. If you are an avid Mothman fan and would like me to examine a specific or different aspect of this story in a future episode, let me know. I'm sure I can accommodate that. But before we get into part 3 of our Mothman series, please don't forget that you can always find out everything about Paranormal Optimist, where to listen, where to follow, and all the sources cited in each episode in the episode description. If you've enjoyed our series on Mothman or any of the other topics we've covered, feel free to share the show with a friend who has an interest in the mysterious and the unexplained. If you have your own story to share, a suggestion for a future episode, or would like to be a guest on the show, send me an email at paranormaloptimist@gmail.com. I am finally starting to get these emails, and I had the opportunity to set up a couple of guests for future episodes. Things are starting to get rolling, and it's going to be a lot of fun, so definitely stay tuned. Last time on Paranormal Optimist. In part 2 of our Mothman series, we discussed why people do or do not believe in the paranormal elements of the Mothman legend. We discussed how many believe that the true explanation for Mothman lies in misidentification of known animals, mass hysteria, or just simply that the whole tidal wave of events was the result of an elaborate hoax. We then discussed how it is the sheer volume of anecdotal evidence, the eyewitness accounts, that compel people to continue to wonder about the true nature of Mothman, even today, 60 years later. We discussed how, of the dozens and dozens of reports, the descriptions of Mothman were incredibly consistent, and that the testimonies themselves were well documented, both in newspapers and by the police who investigated the reports. Whatever Mothman was or wasn't, its effect on Point Pleasant, its people, and its history was real. So let me tell you what to expect from today's episode, this final installment, at least for now, in the Mothman series. I wanted to start out by suggesting my own personal theory for what Mothman was or possibly is, if it's still out there today. We will then jump into a discussion of where to go from here. What do we do with all of this information, all of this lore about Mothman? We'll take a look at the reasons why people today find themselves clinging to the persona of this cryptid, how Mothman has been portrayed in popular culture, and we'll take a look at some modern Mothman sightings. Folklore and real animals, the cryptozoology connection. I know that I've danced around calling Mothman a cryptid, and I've tried to emphasize that not everyone thinks of the Mothman legend as a topic for cryptozoology. To many, Mothman isn't a flesh and blood creature. It's instead some incorporeal paranormal entity. It's a bad omen or a harbinger of doom. Some believe Mothman was an extraterrestrial or an interdimensional life form. I've even seen some theories that Mothman was a ghost. So where do I fall on this spectrum of belief? I've already stated in parts 1 and 2 of this series that I do not believe every aspect of the Mothman story. As usual, I will be the first to tell you, my opinion is not worth any more than anyone else's when it comes to such a complex and fascinating chain of events. I'm not from Point Pleasant. I'm not from West Virginia. I wasn't alive at the time of the original sightings. I don't have the same perspective that some others may have when it comes to Mothman. When I say that my opinion is not worth any more than anyone else's, believe me, I truly mean that. So if you have a different opinion than me and you would like to talk to me about it, please send me an email. I would love to discuss this with you. Whenever it comes to a paranormal topic, I'm always ready to be wrong, and I would always love to be wrong if it means that I can learn something else about that topic. So please, send me your corrections, send me those messages. But for those of you who care to know where I stand, I will say this. I have particular trouble rationalizing the depiction of Mothman as this all-knowing harbinger of doom, and I do not believe in any connection with the collapse of the Silver Bridge. I also find John Keel's take about the ultra-terrestrials to be absolutely fascinating, but it's a rabbit hole that I will need to spend a lot of time traveling down before I can really even speak about it at all. So look out for more discussion about those beings in a future episode. I have some books in mind that I need to read, and hopefully I'll understand more about that concept after reading those. My knee-jerk opinion about that theory, though, is that it just honestly seems a lot more complicated than it needs to be when it comes to explaining what Mothman is or was. And my reason for saying that is that what I essentially believe is that Mothman is some kind of incredibly large bird, but not a misidentified crane or owl. I do not believe that dozens or close to 100 witnesses from the area failed to recognize common and drastically smaller birds. I do not believe that Mothman is a known species of native wildlife being mistaken for something else. I believe Mothman is something else. It's a cryptid. If I had to guess, I would say that whatever Mothman is, it shares its roots with whatever the legends of Thunderbirds are based on. So to unravel this idea, let's talk about Thunderbirds. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, native folklore from various American tribes defines Thunderbirds as powerful spirits that take the form of enormous birds. The beating of their wings was said to have caused thunder, and lightning would erupt from their beaks. Artwork typically depicts Thunderbirds as these incredibly massive birds with unimaginably large wingspans. Various sightings of creatures closely resembling the Thunderbirds of Native American folklore have been cited all over North America for hundreds of years, including specifically the Appalachian region where the Mothman stories were born. By the 20th and 21st centuries, cryptozoologists began to wonder if the legends were based on an actual flesh and blood creature, a real animal that was living mostly undiscovered in the wilderness of what is now the continental U.S. From my research, it appears that some stories about Thunderbirds as cryptids are of the belief that the animal is more along the lines of a pterodactyl or some other should-be extinct flying creature. There was a case in 1890 where two cowboys living in Arizona claimed to have killed what they called a giant bird. But when they described what it looked like, they said it had the wings of a bat and the head of an alligator. The story was originally printed in a newspaper called the Tombstone Epitaph. The witnesses stated that the creature was 92 feet long and had a wingspan of 160 feet. There was no photograph. It was 1890, so that might have been kind of hard to accomplish, but cameras did exist, and many do believe that the story was likely a hoax. And it actually has been proven that many similar hoaxes occurred in later years that shared many of the same story beats. Regardless, this case is often cited as one of the first English-language documented encounters with a Thunderbird. For a more recent story, and one that is more bird-like, we have a case from 1977 in which a group of boys claim to have been attacked by a group of giant birds in Lawndale, Illinois. One of these boys was reportedly briefly lifted off the ground by one of these birds and carried a short distance before being dropped. Multiple witnesses described these birds as all black with white rings around their necks. Subsequent, less dramatic sightings continued well into the 2000s and still occasionally occur to this day. If you read through the documented Mothman sightings, it is consistently referred to as a huge bird-like creature. Honestly, if we can just take a moment to erase our internal image of what popular culture has told us Mothman looks like and only consider the written reports at face value, what I see is an enormous bird. Some reports do describe the creature as being humanoid in appearance, but actually very few specifically state the presence of arms in addition to wings. Most commonly, the creature is described to be 6 to 7 or more feet tall, with strong legs and huge wings. To me, the humanoid qualities can still be explained by this creature actually being a bird. To visualize this, I suggest looking up images of the harpy eagle. This large bird has an unsettlingly human-like appearance that's difficult to describe. I have posted one image on Facebook and Instagram, but definitely look up others and tell me what you think. Also, and this is just a completely off-the-wall random thought that came to me during my research. Who here has played the original Pokemon Red and Blue or any of the games that followed that original Kanto storyline? Zapdos was a giant legendary bird that was an electric-type Pokemon. Zapdos lived in the power plant. So, it's a thunderbird living in a power plant. Google says I'm wrong, and that nothing about Zapdos' lore was based on Mothman. But I'm really not so sure. Maybe one of the developers in Japan also believes that Mothman was a thunderbird, and this was a nod to that. A lot of other Pokemon are based on cryptids or supernatural legends, even really obscure ones. Many of the Mothman sightings took place in the Old North Power Plant in the TNT area. So many that some locals actually started referring to the building as the birdhouse. So am I making a connection that doesn't exist because I really want Mothman to be connected to Pokemon? Maybe. Let me know what you think. Send me an email or connect with me online. In part 1 of this series, I said that I fell into this cryptozoological gray area when it came to Mothman. It brings up this necessary yet confusing question. Are cryptids paranormal? For me, I think that cryptids are only paranormal until they are discovered and accepted to exist by the scientific community. As we talked about in my episode about cryptozoology, once a cryptid is discovered, zoology gains a new animal, while cryptozoology loses a cryptid. To make matters worse, or at least more confusing, this is also how I feel about extraterrestrial life. We only include the discussion of aliens in the paranormal because we don't have irrefutable proof yet that they exist. Once we get that proof, they really aren't paranormal anymore, are they? What now? So, what do we do with all of this information that we have learned about Mothman and all of the associated phenomena that plagued Point Pleasant from 1966 to 1967? Where do we go from here? In this section, I'm hoping to answer quite a few leftover questions from my Mothman research. Why do people today embrace the image of Mothman with such genuine affection? What is the current status of this entity in popular culture? And how has that status influenced or led to modern Mothman sightings? Trauma and mass hysteria. One compelling and poetic argument that I came across in my Mothman research was that the connection between Mothman and the Silver Bridge was an example of the narrative hijacking of a real tragedy that eventually warped itself into local lore. In a great article I read titled "The Mothman Myth: How Folklore Overshadowed Tragedy and Why Today's Media Continues to Prioritize Spectacle Over Truth," this argument is examined. Tragedy is hard to deal with. Public tragedy, perhaps even more so. Something like the collapse of a bridge becomes a shared trauma, a shared grief that becomes a part of the landscape of the community. As a coping mechanism, it is quite common to see people yearn for explanation or something to blame, something or someone to blame. We want distraction and a quick fix that will make the discomfort of the event go away. For many, this explains the obsession with Mothman. The real story of the physical defects, which eventually led to the bridge's failure, were replaced by the spectacle of a monster story. This tragic event is forever linked to Mothman, regardless of any real connection between the two. Many would argue that the public sentiment about the collapse of the Silver Bridge is now more about Mothman than it is about the 46 people who died that day. It's easier to face a monster that may not exist than it is to face the loss of these very real people. Overall, the argument here seems to be that even though there were many, many sightings of something in that entire year leading up to the Silver Bridge, it was the fixation on blaming Mothman for this tragedy that truly gave these stories staying power. Seeing a cryptid is one thing. People see Bigfoot all the time. But blaming a cryptid for a real tragedy? That turns it into a legend. Mothman in pop culture. The most popular book written about Mothman is undeniably John Keel's The Mothman Prophecies. It is due to this book, which chronicled the experiences of Keel in Point Pleasant as he investigated the reported Mothman, UFO, MIB, and other paranormal phenomenon that put this case on the radar of a popular audience. Prior to this, Mothman was really only known to residents local to the areas of the sighting and to fringe paranormal enthusiasts. Even more influential in some ways to the emergence of Mothman in pop culture was the film adaptation. Releasing under the same name, The Mothman Prophecies brought the story of Mothman to the big screen in 2002, 36 years after the events in Point Pleasant. It told a compelling story, had a stellar cast, and had began and ended with those haunting disclaimers about being based on true events. It's not hard to understand how this combination of factors led to the film's success and created renewed interest in the reports from decades earlier. On top of this film brought the topic to a mass audience, not just those interested specifically in the paranormal. The release of this film also created a renewed interest in Point Pleasant to embrace Mothman as part of the town's history. Having a famous local cryptid not only benefits the community through a sense of local connection, but it also has economic benefits. The Mothman Festival started in 2002 and has been a massive attraction for tourists and locals alike ever since. Some reports state that this annual event draws upwards of 15,000 to 20,000 people to Point Pleasant and generates $2 million in revenue for the community. Modern Mothman sightings. Believe it or not, there are still Mothman sightings reported occasionally, even now, 60 years later. Unlike the original flap of sightings, Mothman is apparently no longer tied to Point Pleasant or even West Virginia. While still mostly happening in North America, according to a map hub page created by Spooky Site, modern sightings have occurred in places like the Ukraine, Russia, and Japan. One of the more notable flaps of Mothman sightings that have occurred since the original events of Point Pleasant are the Chicago Mothman sightings. So let's just look briefly at a breakdown of this flap. 2011. The first cluster of reports was apparently gathered and posted online by Fortean researcher Lon Strickler of Phantoms and Monsters. These posts were the earliest examples I could find of this flap and had witnesses referring to what they saw as the Chicago Mothman or the Lake Michigan Mothman. By and large, the depictions sound very similar to the original Point Pleasant sightings, with people claiming to have seen a winged humanoid. 2017. A major spike in both the number of sightings and media attention occurred in the spring and summer of 2017. During this time, media outlets such as Vice and the Chicago Local Press reported about 55 sightings. These eyewitness accounts included descriptions that ranged from the expected winged humanoid to other variations that spoke of huge, as in abnormally huge, owls, or even gargoyle-like creatures. Whatever these creatures were, people were seeing them perched on towers or flying along the coast of Lake Michigan. 2018 to 2019. Through these next 2 years, reports continued to surface sporadically. During this period, the reports mostly came from suburban areas of other northern Illinois towns. It does not seem that any of these reports were taken too seriously, as most of the depictions and reports seem to focus mostly on the folklore of Mothman, rather than any real biologic discussions or serious attempts to identify what people were seeing. While many of the Point Pleasant cases were taken seriously as a matter of possible public safety, these cases seem to have been more of an oddity or a lighthearted mystery. Just as a general overview of what we just discussed, sightings of Mothman began cropping up in the Chicago area in 2011 and experienced a major peak in 2017. Since 2017, there have still been some occasional sightings all through the years until very recently. If these sightings are still happening today, which is 2025 at the time of this writing, I couldn't find any discussion about it online. So who knows? Maybe this flap has run its course. Where will Mothman be next? As for those sightings I briefly mentioned outside of the USA, these seem to be tied largely to the persona of Mothman as a harbinger of doom. The Ukraine sighting was at Chernobyl. The Japan sighting was at the Fukushima power plant. These sightings were reported retroactively and were stated to have occurred before the well-known disasters that occurred at both of these locations. So some delicious lore to be sure, but not much to investigate. It's just one of those things that would be incredible if it could be proven, but it really just can't be. It's up to you to decide whether or not those sightings actually happened, or if it was just narrative hijacking again. Why do we love Mothman? Online, Mothman is the subject of some of the most adorable media. You can buy Mothman stickers, tumblers, keychains, and t-shirts on Etsy. You can make a giant Mothman plushie at the Build-A-Bear workshop. Cute depictions of cryptids are very popular right now, and Mothman is definitely one of the most popular mascots. But why? To close out this final, for now, installment of our Mothman series, I wanted to include some recordings of modern people who, to my knowledge, have no links to Point Pleasant or the original sightings, talking about why they love Mothman. Because believe me, there is a lot of love out there for this spooky boy.
I love Mothman because he's the only moth that runs from light. Well, I mean, except for chasing cars, but that's maybe actually why he's chasing cars.
I think I love Mothman mostly because of all of the cute stickers and products and stories that he has inspired, as well as costumes and whatnot. Also, he was kind of a gateway cryptid for me into all of the weird stuff that was happening in the Appalachian Mountains. So I really do appreciate Mothman for that and for introducing me to a whole nother world of cryptid weirdness.
The thing that I find most fascinating about the Mothman is simply that it's impossible to know what its motivations actually are. It's a portent of disaster, but why? Is it malicious and intentionally causing these disasters? Is it benevolent and is trying to warn people of the danger? Or is it just existing, and these events happen to happen around it? That ambiguity is why I really love the Mothman.
The thing I love about Mothman, at least the current iteration, is I love just this general cult pop culture that has come up around his lore. From the little books that you can now get from Hazy Dell Press, to plushies, to stickers, to the really funny Mothman statue that's at Point Pleasant that has become like this icon for him, to the fact that he's appearing in video games. I think that rise of cryptid lore is really, really cool. And the fact that it's not entirely negative, and the fact that it's more positive than anything, is what makes it amazing.
Thank you so much to those of you who responded to my call to action. On Facebook and on Instagram, I put out some feelers to see who would like to answer this question. Why do you love Mothman? And I asked for some audio files to be sent in. So I really appreciate you taking the time to respond to my request, taking the time to record your thoughts and send them in, because I just think it's so much more interesting to hear multiple viewpoints when it comes to a story like this. So if there's ever anything that you have an opposing viewpoint on in the future, send me your thoughts too, and we can do a follow-up episode. I think that sort of thing is a lot of fun, and I just love community engagement when it comes to podcasts. That's why I wanted to make a podcast in the first place. So thank you so much to everybody who submitted something to me. And that brings us to the end of our Mothman series. And since we're at the end of the recording, I guess I can finally admit to myself mostly that there is something wrong with my voice. I think the school year plague has struck again, so hopefully it didn't affect the enjoyability of the podcast too much. Hopefully it's not that noticeable, and I'm sure it will be better by next week. So in this final chapter, I shared my own theory of what Mothman might be, which, in my opinion, is a topic for further study by cryptozoology. We then stepped back to ask some bigger questions. What do we do with all this lore? And why does it still matter today? Why are people still talking about Mothman 60 years later? We looked at the fascination people continue to have with the story, the psychological basis for that fascination, and how Mothman keeps resurfacing in modern sightings and how that keeps the legend alive. We also explored why so many people have embraced Mothman, not just as a mysterious figure, but as something that's become strangely comforting and even lovable. So maybe that's the real power of Mothman. He's more than just a shadow in the sky or a warning of disaster. He's a reminder of how cryptids can grow and change and take root in our lives. And whether you see him as a monster, a myth, or simply as a big bird, one thing is certain. Mothman isn't going anywhere. He's become a permanent part of our culture, our imaginations, and our hearts. If you have a story of your own, a suggestion for a future topic, or if you'd just like to hop on a Zoom call with me and talk about anything in this wide world of weirdness, I'd be thrilled to hear from you. The best way to contact me will always be by sending an email to paranormaloptimist@gmail.com. I'm just going to be honest right now, I do maintain the social media pages, but I am terrible at it and I hate it. I usually forget TikTok exists, and I always forget that YouTube has features similar to Instagram and Facebook, so that's on me. I go on the apps as little as I possibly can, so the best way to get a hold of me is going to be by email. I know it makes me sound like a dinosaur, but for someone who was here for the literal birth of social media, someone who had a MySpace, someone who fell down that rabbit hole and wasted literal decades to doom scrolling, I'm just burnt out and I'm over it now, so it is what it is. But you can find all my sources, links, and ways to connect in the episode description. And if Paranormal Optimist has been sparking your curiosity, the best way to support the show is to share it with someone else who loves exploring the strange and the interesting. Thank you so much for listening to Paranormal Optimist. I'm Stephanie, your host, researcher, writer, and producer. Music for today's episode comes courtesy of Purple Planet Music. Until next time, believe a little, doubt a lot, but never stop wondering.